Hello, anyone watching, and good evening, Glen Buckley. It's good to see you back fighting fit and
Yes.
fighting for the cause of APTA. And hopefully this evening we'll give you an opportunity to bring everybody back up to speed on the APTA saga, the ongoing saga, and what the next steps in that are. How have you been, and what have you been up to?
Yeah, no, I've been good, thanks, Clinton. As you know, it's been a tough 4 years, and I had a couple of weeks in a hospital recently, but that was actually very, very good for me. I've come out now. I'm looking at myself on the image here, and I actually look quite pale and anemic. I think it's the lighting in my garage here, so don't worry, I haven't deteriorated. Won't say I look good, but I look better than I do in this image, so nothing to worry about. All good, all good.
Yeah, and on that subject, can I apologise to you and everyone who may watch this video? Obviously, we're not doing the slick production. We need the Marilyn Monroe lights and makeup to make us look better. So if there's any technical glitches in the video, bear with us, please. If my fat thumbs manage to push the wrong buttons, bear with us, please, because ultimately, I think that going live and doing this live gives it some authenticity rather than some slick rehearsed production. The other thing I'd like to apologise for is that, of course, the short discussion over an hour or an hour and a half can't do justice to everything that happened to you and APTA over the years. And so, you know, my aim is to try to help focus on, you know, the big milestones and the key things in all of this that resulted in the whole thing, your whole business collapsing. So no doubt reliving some of this may be a bit traumatic for you. So if you need a break or something like that, let us know, because it's trying to tell the life story of APTA and you and your family in an hour and a half is doesn't do it justice. But on that subject, can you give us a bit of an overview of the beginnings of APTA and Melbourne Flight Training, which, as far as I know, are different names for the same corporate entity?
Correct. Yeah, there's only ever one ABN, one ACN, one business, and that business, if you like, I'm not an account, I'm not an accountant, but yeah, the company started off being called Melbourne Flight Training. The company changed its name. No change to ABN directors or anything like that. Just purely a name change from MFT to APTA. So from Melbourne Flight Training to Australian Pilot Training Alliance. So it was the name of the company, the AOC holder. That was the only thing. A name change to more reflectively replicate, rather than be called Melbourne Flight Training, I wanted it called Australian Pilot Training Alliance to accurately reflect what it was. So correct, it is the same company and the same business. It operated as a flying school since, I think, late 2005, early 2006. Based on the feedback that I got from CASA, we had an industry leading of safety and compliance throughout that time. Yeah, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm trying to explain to you that it was a well-intentioned business. And interestingly, I will pat myself and the team on the back for this, but that business grew to, I think, be the second busiest flying school in Victoria over a period of 2 years without spending a single cent on advertising, on word of mouth, because my business partner at the time and I put our heart and soul in and tried to run a good flying school. What happened over the years, other flying schools will lose their chief flying instructor. That was a terminology at the time, rather than the head of operations, the chief flying instructor. What's referred to as one of the key personnel. Those schools were quite often, and this was quite common in regional areas where flying schools can't attract, they don't have the turnover, the volume of work to attract a CFI to a regional area. About the situation. So just to recap there, so I had a flying school since 2006. During that period, what happened, other flying schools sometimes lose their what was called their chief flying instructor or their key personnel, which would mean that flying school operations weren't permitted to continue by CASA. So on occasion, those businesses or those flying schools approached me and asked me to take over their operations for them, to allow to continue my key personnel and my AOC to run their operations. So this concept of this remote bases or these bases that we had been going for a decade. Now, CASA had approved several bases under the system. So we had my own base, Melbourne Flight Training. We were doing a flight instructor training school for another flying school, all approved by CASA. We had a base up in Darwin approved by CASA. I think we even had one at Alice Springs approved by CASA. We had multiple. I've been doing this for years. TVSA down at Bacchus Marsh. So this is where we took over their operation, and we would run their operation using a combination of our own employees of another entity. The point of it is this practice that I'd done was completely standard practice. I'd been doing it for a decade. The new regulatory structure came along, and I have all of these emails that are evidence of this. This isn't a he said, she said. This isn't people's opinions. This is all documented, well written, with witnesses. So when the new regulations came in, Part 1, Part 1, 4, 2 were coming in. They were scheduled to be introduced in 2006, but they were delayed a decade repeatedly, and they eventually came in 2017 in September. Now, the requirement of those regulations that all of Australia's 300 flying schools had done a transitionary program to the new regulatory structure. Now, to meet that new regulatory structure, I approached CASA and I invested hundreds of thousands of dollars with my key personnel over a 3-year process, designing the exact structure that a couple of years later, CASA would turn around and say they'd never heard about, they didn't know what I was doing, and it was illegal. CASA approved this structure. As I say, I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. The CASA interviewed the personnel. We wrote the manuals. We had to submit 10 to 600 points. All of this designed exactly for what we were doing, for this multi-base approach under my one authorisation. CASA approved it in April of revalidated, approved it to continue in the new regulatory structure. They did that in April of 2017.
To be able to...
I just continued on in your absence. So I was just basically up to the stage, Clinton, a brief outline back, but we're not operating bases for many, many years. That I went through a very extensive process in the lead up to the new regulatory structure that was scheduled to commence in September 2017. The previous 3 years to that, I invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in systems and procedures, writing operations manuals, technical writers, submitting 600 requirements to CASA, CASA approving them, workshopping them with me, then approving it, or not approving it, sorry, then sending it within CASA to a peer review. Then once the peer review was done, the authorisation was issued to keep doing what I'd been doing for the decade previously. This all happened in April 2017. It was approved. I continued on after that date. CASA formally added additional bases to it. I was getting, I won't say patted on the back, but I mean, it was working very, very well. It was increasing safety because we were bringing a lot of individual resources from different schools into the organisation and sharing that. It was a very, very, and it's been operating. I've been doing this for a decade, Clinton. And I walked into work on one day with no idea, no one ever saying anything to me. I remember I opened up my email in the afternoon. And I get an email telling me that I've got 7 days to operate. I'm operating unlawfully. My bases are unauthorised, including my own flying school that I've operated for a decade, my Melbourne Flight Training, my first base that I opened up. The whole lot's just without anyone ever saying anything to me. No concerns ever raised about it. It was bizarre.
So if I can master the technology, we'll flash up that 23rd of October 2018 letter that was sent to you and is referred to in the CEO of CASA's letter to you of the 25th of May this year, and we'll get to that as well. But I first want to tease out some very, very important factual points. Mm-hmm. So as APTA's AOC authorisation was expanding, mm-hmm. With CASA's approval, that's the only way. It's CASA granting those. Did any of those operations at those various locations mm-hmm. utilise people who were not employees of APTA? That is, they weren't on the APTA entity payroll. Mm-hmm. Did any of those activities at those bases include people like that?
I mean, they did, Clinton, yeah, but that's standard industry practice. I mean, no organisation ever, and there's no requirement that it be like that way, and there shouldn't be. So, correct, I had a combination of part-time contractors, full-time, people that were employed by other entities. I had people doing things voluntary. We ran an Air Force cadet program up in Darwin, which was a voluntary thing we did for the Air Force cadets up there. And I mean, yeah, so that was, yeah, that's right. So absolutely, not every person was an employee.
Yeah, and as we know, that there are plenty of flying training organisations who bring on instructors as independent contractors, not as employees, and they do that for tax purposes, superannuation purposes, and other purposes. And they're not employees of the entity that holds the AOC, and that's gone on. And we'll get to looking at the actual legislation. And so far as I can see, there's nothing in the legislation that requires all personnel of an AOC holder to be their employees. And the other thing that I wanted to ask is, did any of those flying training activities utilise aircraft of which APTA was neither the registered operator nor registered owner?
That's correct. And we clarified that with CASA. Effectively, CASA's definition of it, the registered operator, think of it as it's the person who's paying the maintenance. That's the way CASA wanted it. So we weren't and we had this in our contract. So we were the operator of the aircraft. But when it came to the law, the legal definition and the responsibilities of the registered operator, that was very clearly clarified with CASA. It's the way CASA wanted it. And as I say, I tended to that very, very clearly in our induction agreements when these aircraft were inducted into our systems, very clearly.
But in any event, the point I want to tease out, as a matter of fact, the things that subsequently were said to be resulting in all these operations being unauthorised were known to CASA. And if the rules required that only APTA employees could do things under APTA's AOC, and only aircraft of which APTA was the registered operator could be utilised in those flying training activities, that should have been explained to you by CASA each time you applied for a variation. That's what you were paying for. Presumably you paid a fee to have the application assessed by CASA.
Well, it's a comprehensive process, I can assure you, including on-site visits and across-the-table meetings and writing manuals and procedure. It's a very comprehensive procedure, and I depend on CASA for it because it's CASA that tell me the requirements. I meet the requirements, I submit it, they approve it. I mean,
yes. So if all of these things were so important from a regulatory perspective, CASA should have explained that to you and said, "Oh no, we can't approve this location to be under your AOC because there are a whole bunch of people here who aren't your employees, and you're not the registered operator of these aircraft." It seems obvious that should have been explained if it was, and enforced if it was such an important thing.
Correct. Would you agree? I don't know if you'd agree with me this on Clinton, but there's no requirement that anybody be employees. And in actual fact, if you think of it, CASA's definition, if you like, or the way they're interpreting it, is less safe than my way of interpreting it. Because the way I look at it, and the way the legislation is written, and the way it's been done in the industry for years, from Qantas do it, the Air Force do it, all the airlines do it, all the flying schools do it, not everybody is an employee. The responsibility is much bigger than the employee. Like if someone goes out flying under my AOC, delivering flight training at the Latrobe Valley base, the Ballarat base, that responsibility that I hold is identical, irrespective of whether they're an employee. CASA seems trying to suggest that I have a different level of responsibility if somebody's an employee.
Yeah. Well, I looked at. We'll.
Yes, exactly.
We know that an email was sent to you, and we'll show that email where Peter White, I think on 30th of April 2019, wrote to you and said that CASA got external legal advice to say that what you were doing was not precluded by the rules. I respectfully agree with that opinion, because presumably whoever gave it went to read the rules. But we'll see what damage had been done to APTA. But at this point in time, I'm just looking at the definition of personnel in the Civil Aviation Safety Regulations. This is in Part 141, and there's also the equivalent definition in 142, and it says personnel for a Part 141 operator includes, now first thing is, this is a legal point, includes means it's not an exhaustive definition. It's saying the operator's personnel includes this bunch of people, but it could also be even broader. But if we read on, includes any of the following persons who have duties or responsibilities that relate to the safe conduct of the operator's authorised Part 141 flight training. An employee of the operator. Now, if only employees were allowed, then that's what it would say, but it goes on.
Correct.
And it says a person. Now, again, a very fine legal point. A person in Commonwealth law can be a corporate person, an artificial person, or a natural person. And as we know, so any person, so it could be, you could get a check and training, Us Proprietary Limited in to do check and training, and that's a company and with people underneath it, or this could deal with individuals like independent instructors. A person engaged by the operator, whether by contract or other arrangement, to provide services to the operator, an employee of a person mentioned in paragraph B. So not only does it anticipate people who are what I'll call independent contractors rather than employees, it says a person engaged under whatever arrangement. So I understand that. So there was correspondence in 2019, June 2019, from Craig Martin that effectively said no. They've all got to be employees, and that's it. So
I could actually probably access that fairly quick here if you want. In fact, I've got access. So remember, so just to recap, just very quickly on this for those that are following. I hope most people are following it. It seems clear to me. It might not be, but I'd operate that business with a combination of people who were my employees and who they weren't. That had been okay for a decade, and then all of a sudden the whole thing changed. Now consider this, Clinton. And Casa told me this, and you could put the question to Casa now, if every single person in APTA had have been my employee, I would never have heard from Casa. And I want to emphasise that this isn't a quality control issue. I really want to, because people assume that because Casa came after Glen Buckley, he was doing something wrong. There's no quality control issue. The systems were designed for the specific purpose that they were doing with Casa. And I put that to Miss Spence when I had the opportunity. And I said, I want you to tell me what I did wrong. But I just want to jump around a bit here. You've very clearly clarified in my mind what I knew right from the start, what the whole industry knew, and what Casa should have known, that the relationship of the employed, that's not what it's about. It's the person operating under the authorization. Yet, this is what Casa used as the basis for me to give away all my students, because they said to me, now this is coming from this is senior personnel within Casa. This is the executive manager, regulatory services and surveillance at the time. Now, out of respect for him, I'm not going to say his name because he's left the organisation. Nevertheless, he wrote to me, very senior position, for the avoidance of doubt, this would allow flight training to be conducted by APTA employees only, not employees of affiliates.
Well, yes. Yes. Well, we'll catch back up to that correspondence because when you look at this stuff, they just change tack and just say, oh, this is okay. It's not okay. It's not precluded. We just need to get contracts in place, and then suddenly another position changes. But I just want to get up to the 22nd of October, 2018. I picked that date for a reason. The 22nd of October, 2018, which is the day before you received a letter. How much? I know it won't do its justice in 2 minutes, but how much time and energy and money and effort had you gone to, and how many hours do you estimate, or days, did you work alongside with Casa to satisfy them of the rules that they were requiring you to comply with, and for which they certified you, APTA?
Years, Clinton, years. Now, if I had to put hours on it, now obviously, truly, and the staff, it wasn't just me. I had people appointed this. I had technical writers. I had personnel being approved by CASA to move into new roles. I had a staff member doing a 12-month induction. I mean, that, it's not about what it cost me, but these were big, big investments I was making. I mean, that person alone was going to become the third CASA-approved head of operations. There was probably an investment of $50,000, $60,000 in that person over a 12-month period to get them up to. It was an enormous project. It was everything. But remember, because schools couldn't operate after September 2018 if they hadn't done this. So it was a process that was forced upon me by CASA if I wanted to continue operating. But it was a big project, and I commenced the project because CASA approached me to take a lead on it. So I don't want to get too technical here, but the legislation was supposed to be introduced on September 1st, 2017. There were about 300 schools in Australia. Hardly any of them were ready. And this was evident about 18 months before. CASA approached me, asked me to take a lead on it, which I did, which I got approved then in April 2017. And then weeks later, CASA announced the whole thing was going to be delayed another 12 months. And that left me effectively with a white elephant for 12 months, funding salaries with APTA sort of hanging out fairly loose. But I invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, but not just me, a very, very passionate, highly qualified, industry-leading team of staff and management that were all involved in putting their heart and soul into. I'd got an ex-CASA safety advisor. He worked for the organisation to set up the safety department. I've had ex-military people. I had an industry. It was, Clinton, truly, I would be very confident to say, and CASA led me to believe this as well in the emails that they said, this is probably the biggest project truly undertaken by a flying school in Australia at the time. Now, if you consider Oxford flight training, and I remember Oxford flight training at conferences talking about giving negative feedback on the size of this project, it was enormous, Clinton. It took, to put it in perspective, Clinton, the previous 10 years of my business's profit, and, it wasn't, it's a flying school now, it makes $1 million out of a flying school. I invested more than the previous decade's entire profit into that process with CASA up until October, to get that approved in April 2017. Truly. Everything went into that.
At the end of all that effort, blood, sweat and tears and working with CASA, you got approvals that covered the flying training activities that were being conducted at a variety of geographical locations. And then a hand grenade was lobbed into the middle of all that, and I'll get up the 23 October 2018 letter, and I haven't seemed to have been. And so, sorry for those watching, I've got to look to the side. So this is a letter, and I'm going to cover one of the issues that were brought up, but I'm just going to scroll down to the some of the things that have said here. Paragraph 7 of the CASA Aviation Ruling Franchise AOC arrangement states the AOC holder at all times remains responsible for the actions of another person conducting operations under the AOC. That's a statement of the bleeding obvious. Then it says the ruling does not permit an AOC holder to authorise a third-party body corporate to conduct operations under its AOC. Well, the ruling couldn't do that in any event, but that's got nothing to do with you because you didn't authorise other entities, a third party, to get involved in your activity. They certified it, did they not?
And also, I'd point out, Clint, it's very interesting paragraphing here. I'd have to go back to the original because I've just picked up on this. But if you go into that paragraph, just to make sure that where it says the ruling does not permit an AOC holder to authorise, I don't think the aviation ruling said that. Okay, well, the aviation ruling says. No. The aviation ruling says and this is interesting. I don't know, it's a very convenient error, if you like, because it leads one to believe as you do. Now, what the aviation ruling says is the AOC holder at all times remains responsible for the actions of another person, not employee, another person conducting operations under the AOC. I agree 100% with CASA with that. Absolutely. Yeah, every single person. Then they go on to say, the ruling does not. That's someone's interpretation. That's not in the aviation ruling. The ruling does not. So that needs a new paragraph.
They're trying. What they meant to say was the civil aviation rules do not permit. But in any event, what I'm saying is that it wasn't you authorising other people. It was CASA approving changes to your AOC that authorised it. So I don't know what that sentence has to do with it. But then you go into this list of things that they seem to think is relevant to the compliance or otherwise with regulatory requirements of what's going on under APTA's AOC. It says these alliance companies pay their own operating expenses. Well, so what? I mean, there's nothing. Why does CASA care who's paying operating expenses? That's an internal commercial matter, I would have thought, for the AOC holder.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I'll let you go with the flow. But exactly, Clinton. I mean, who they use, if they use Origin Energy or United Energy or they buy, I couldn't care less. You know, I'm in the business of safety compliance. I deal with CASA. You want to go and organise your electricity, that's your business. But yeah, sorry, keep going.
And even if under these arrangements, with your commercial arrangements with these people at these different places, you say, well, you are going to be responsible for buying your own avgas. Well, so what? What's that got to do with CASA? They receive income from students directly. Well, so what? Well, why does CASA care where the money is paid by a student? You could have a flying school that's set up for charity and no one receives any money, or
and we did those. That's right. I mean, we did that for the Air Force cadets. We did Scout. That's just it. I mean, it's got, I mean, we're talking about safety, maintenance, operational control. That's right. It's got nothing to do with it. There's nothing in the legislation that alludes to it.
So, in any event, what we'll see is, and we'll go through this letter, but what we'll see is, in effect, this presented you with a fait accompli. There was no real room to move. This was all going on now, unauthorised and therefore illegally, even though it had been authorised by CASA. It says your website also lists as members, in addition to those companies mentioned above, ARC Aviation, Flight Standards Aviation, Avia Aircraft, Melbourne Flight Training and Simjet Training Systems. So under the heading unauthorised operations, they're saying that let's pick out Avia Aircraft. How long had that been operating under APTA's AOC as a consequence of a variation approved by CASA?
Okay, Clinton. Now, just for the viewers as well, I am not trying, and I will answer the question. I mean, this is 5 years ago, and there's a lot of things went on. I would suggest 12 months.
Right.
Maybe learn to fly. Maybe we'd had TVSA for a few years prior. In fact, TVSA is on there. We had TVSA transition. Yeah, they would have been on for at least 12. Probably longer. Yeah, no, a good 12 months. And learn to fly probably for about 2 or 3 years.
What about ARC Aviation?
ARC Aviation would be very similar. Would have been, I'd suggest, 12 months.
Which was the one that was in? Didn't they give you an authorisation to do something in Darwin at some stage along?
Yeah, we did Darwin. Darwin was something we did about 8 or 9 years prior, and we shut that down. It's kept the base, but just didn't operate out of there about 6 years ago. But that was the point of the Darwin base. It was exactly these bases, just done almost a decade earlier. So we'd been doing it.
So before that Darwin base, before you pulled out of that Darwin base did utilise people who weren't APTA employees and weren't using aircraft that you weren't the registered operator of, but had nonetheless been authorised by CASA.
Yeah, and inducted into our systems too. So, it's not just a set and forget. I mean, we went up to Darwin, we induct the pilots in because they're now teaching our syllabus. The aircraft have to be inducted to our system. We have to track the maintenance. And CASA, and this is the bizarre thing, CASA's there side by side with us. They come on site. We have to write these procedures. They have to approve it. I mean, I'm dependent on CASA.
Yes, yeah. And they go on to say, as noted above, if APTA has facilitated these companies operating in contravention of the above provisions, APTA would be a party to such contraventions and may be the subject of enforcement action. So, I mean, as we know, all of the contraventions in the civil aviation rules are at least a strict liability offence. So happy days. This is all unauthorised. All of this is criminal activity that's going on. And they're proposing to refuse some approvals that you put in there, and you had 7 days to respond. And as we'll see when we get to the CEO of CASA's letter, she characterised this letter as unexpected and unsettling. And I characterise this as equivalent to rolling a hand grenade into the middle of a family picnic. Anyway, we'll get into that letter. Just as a matter of interest, now it's a letter, it's a public letter. David Jones, how long had he been in that job when he signed that letter?
You know, this is very interesting. Okay, so I didn't even know David Jones. So our previous regional manager had been Michelle Massey. The first that I knew that I had a new regional manager was when that letter came, and I was like, "What? This is like, who's this fella?" So I jumped on the phone because, to be honest with you, first off, you've got to bear in mind, Clinton, I've been operating the business like this for a decade. I speak with CASA on a daily basis. So I meet them, they come on site. We go. I mean, this has been going on for a decade, and then I've got this letter, and it's signed by this fella called David Jones. So I ring him up and I say, "David," I said, "what's going on here?" And his words to me were, these are his exact words, Clinton. And I remember there were witnesses in the room at the time. He said, "Glenn," first off, I said, "can we meet tomorrow?" And he said, "yes." And then he established contact with me. He said, "Look, Glenn, to be honest, I'm not all over it. I need some time." And this is all in writing. I've got this written, Clinton. This is documented things. And I said, because I sent him an email. I said, "David," I said, "you can't be serious." I said, "You've signed that letter and you're seriously telling me you're not all over it." And then he ended up postponing the meeting a week, and I couldn't meet with CASA for a week, and obviously everyone had time to brief him.
Well, it's a pretty standard trick, and I've seen it pulled on numerous occasions. And that is, you get the new kid on the block, the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed new person who's keen to impress, and you give them something that stinks, but that person doesn't understand that it stinks, and effectively use them as a patsy. Now, I don't know. I may have to apologise to David Jones, but I suspect that if he actually woke up and realised what was going on, he probably didn't last long in the organisation. But again, I'm speculating there.
Well, interesting you say it, because he did leave shortly after this whole matter started to come to light, as interesting as a lot of the people involved in it did. I will say something about it. I'm not about his personality. I'm not going to speak to that. And this isn't being disrespectful, but he had no idea about flight training. And this is a lot of the problem. You know, you have a lot of people with no flight training background. In fact, not even pilots usually. And I could be wrong, but I don't believe David Jones has a background as a pilot, or and obviously therefore as a flight instructor. So you have, I'm not going to talk to their intent, but you have people making big decisions about topics they really, with all due respect to them, actually know very little about, because aviation is a massive industry, as you'll appreciate. There's all sorts of aspects to it, but flight training, like the other sectors, is very specialised.
Yeah. Well, now we need to address the paragraph above, which they seized upon. What they put in the letter was they quoted some text from APTA's website, and it said, "Importantly, you retain complete control over your own business." This is an alliance member. "Your business maintains its identity and individuality. Your administration function and procedures remain completely your own, independent of the alliance." Now, what did you mean by that? Because someone like David Jones or another layperson might interpret that as meaning that they have complete control over the conduct of flying training operations and the compliance with regulations, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what you meant?
No, because I would have written that. So I'm trying to sound like a smart aleck, but no, sorry, Clinton. But no, it says, importantly, you retain complete control over your own business. So let's talk about that. And as you say, people outside of flight training might, different components here. We've got the regulatory compliance and we've got the safety. We've got the CASA aspect of the whole thing. That's was our area of expertise. That's what we do. I have no interest. This is back to the business side of it. So if we had a lot of capability. We're a Part 141 organisation, a Part 142 as a group. We had multi-bases. We had CRICOS for the overseas student training approval. We're a registered training organisation. So we had a lot of capability, probably more capability than any other flight training organisation in the country, I would suggest to you. So if we went out and secured a large international pilot training contract, we had the opportunity to rotate them through the bases. It might be that one of the bases doesn't want to get involved in that. That's their business decision. If they choose to get involved in it, I've got control of that operation. So if they want to use recycled photocopy paper and spend a premium to use recycled, good on them, go and do it. If someone wants to buy the other stuff, go and buy that. You want red carpet, shag, the business stuff of it. I wasn't trying to take over the industry, Clinton. I was trying to facilitate the industry being able to continue. So I wanted Latrobe Valley Aero Club as Latrobe Valley Aero Club. If they like sitting around the bar on a Friday night and they don't want to turn it into a big cadet program college, I respect that. So I will manage that operation to be that type of an operation. What beers they've got in the fridge, that's a business decision. You guys choose what beer you want in the fridge. I'm going on a bit about it. It's very important to people who aren't from aviation to understand that anything to do with CASA, I was responsible for. I was the authorisation holder. Someone wants to complain that they don't like the beer, go and speak to the committee.
Yeah. Well, I suspect the fact that it's quoted in the letter seems to me it inexorably follows that there's some profound relevance to what they quoted. And it seems that they have interpreted that as meaning that APTA had no control over anything that was going on, whereas what you're saying is it's all those things. You had no control over the things you couldn't be bothered having to control over because they had nothing to do with compliance with the civil aviation rules.
Well, safety, correct. That's right. I mean, but those things, they're just of no interest to me. I mean, I don't want to get distracted by those sort of issues. I'm focusing on safety and compliance. But it also does say in here, we'll take on the responsibility for the key personnel requirements. So all of the responsibilities are laid out in the CASR 141142, and all of those responsibilities are laid out, and my key personnel have to ensure those things. So the responsibility of the key personnel requirements, as outlined in the legislation, remained mine.
Yes. And so that letter is lobbed like a hand grenade into your lap. What else did CASA do around and following that time?
Right. Well, you got to understand, and sorry, let's put that down. And just to reiterate, this has been going on for 10 years. I've designed this with CASA. I've got CASA patting me on the back. CMT, my original CMT team thought it was great. In fact, one of them said to me, Glenn, you're the first person in Australia that understands Part 141 and 142. Ask Ballarat Aero Club and Latrobe Valley Aero Club both found out about APTA because a CASA employees directed them to APTA. I mean, and they'll testify that. I've spoken to them. They'll tell the truth. Everybody will tell the truth if they ask. So to get that on that correspondence on the 23rd, I remember sitting at my desk and we had a family function that evening. And I remember sitting there, it was about 2:30, and I opened up the email and I read that. And I was just absolutely blown away. Now, remember, I didn't say anything to my staff, my managers, because I thought, wow, this is just going to shake the confidence out of all of the work you guys have been putting in for the last 3 years. And I remember sitting there just trying to digest it and trying to work out, what is this? This was just it was just bizarre, to have, and it was a quality issue at all. There would have been something leading up to it. This is going wrong. You got to fix this. It just came out I can't tell you the shock. And I remember going to a family function and doing my best to be engaged at that evening. Now, during the afternoon, because it was actually sent to my head of operations, and it just didn't click to me at the time, I think, the shock of it. And the other head of operations, we were both approved. The other one came up to me, Erman, and he said, because it was addressed to him, and he raised it with me, and then, it got out. And shortly after, CASA wrote to all of the customers, including the ones that they'd pre-approved, saying that you're operating unlawfully, subject to prosecution. They wrote to the applications that I had pending. The whole thing was devastating. This wasn't a rejection. Pip Spence wrote to me recently and said, regarding the rejection of the two significant changes, the addition of two new bases, that wasn't the issue, Glenn. They actually said I was unlawful, subject to prosecution. This is standard industry practice, what I'm doing. I can't tell you. And what happened immediately, you've got to understand the model that I built with CASA from the outset, and I have the emails where we're discussing all this, and the CASA personnel, past and present employees, will come forward and tell the truth in this. I've spoken to them. They'll tell the truth, not go on my side, not go on CASA's, tell the truth. Yeah, it's an enormous project. It's bizarre.
And what were the financial and other consequences for the whole?
What I built with CASA and had approved by CASA 18 months earlier cost me about $1 million a year to run, Clinton. Okay, it was about $20,000 a week. Okay, I had admin staff, technical writers. I had 2 approved CASA safety managers being the key personnel, 2 CASA approved CEOs. Okay, it was big business. We had and interesting, the Ombudsman never even asked to look at this, but we had the exposition. This was all controlled by a system called Flight School Manager that we had designed. It cost a lot of money, and it was dependent on, as CASA was fully aware, and as is written in the proposals that I put to CASA, and as the CASA people say, the whole concept was designed on me having 10 entities under the approval. That's what made the process break even. I needed 10 members on board. Okay. Put rough figures on it, $1 million to run a year, need 10 members each putting in $100,000, and we can fund the biggest safety department in Australia. $250,000 on the safety department. No school is bigger than that. Oversight systems. Clinton, I was the first flight training organisation in Australia that opened up all of our systems to CASA in real time so that CASA could see flight and duties. They could see who was out flying, what SAR times had expired. Have we done our safety meeting, the safety minute notes, training records up to date? CASA could look into from their office in the city for the first time ever everything that we could see. They had full access. So the levels of operational control oversight are unparalleled. So,
Unfortunately, according to CASA, on the 23rd of October, it was all unauthorised, even though they'd certified it all. So did you suffer financially? What else happened?
Well, you've got to remember that. So this has cost me. I've limped through the previous year because remember, CASA told us it was going to be ready. We had to be ready to go in September 2017, as I was. Then they changed their mind. So the business limped along for 12 months, hemorrhaging cash. So that's when I sold my home to keep staff on for the new delayed date. Then when that date came around, and I wrote this whole thing for the new legislation. The new legislation comes in 2 months. 2 months after, it's unlawful against the new legislation that we just wrote it for.
Yes.
But no one was going to join APTA straight away. The members that had already been approved are devastated because their bases are dependent on my approval. It's now got 7 days of operation. So all these bases that have been operated with the cap, and I understand their confidence is shaken. Their businesses also, those schools are only operating for another 7 days, those bases. So they're terrified. Anybody who's got their applications pending for APTA, and these bases got to understand, if I take the base up at Ballina, they have to set the base up for CASA to come and inspect. This isn't a paperwork exercise. We go and say, we want to open up at Ballina. They tell us the requirements. We set up the base. We induct the people, set the safety department up, all the systems and procedures. Then CASA comes and inspects it and ticks off on the procedure. So this is big investments by people, and this is a lot of people lost a lot of money because when CASA turn all that around and say, no, now everybody has to be an employee, you've got 7 days to trade. Existing customers are terrified. No one's going to join APTA, so I'm never going to be able to get to the 10 customers to reach my break-even point to operate this system. So until I got 10 members on board, I'm subsidising that as my family were and trying to keep the staff salaries on. So, and I think that's something the Ombudsman, or maybe I haven't communicated well enough, but, I built this to require 10 members. It wasn't one member and the other 9 were extra profit. It was built. It needed 10 approved members to operate. Otherwise, I had to fund it. Once my own funds had run out, because it was staff salaries, my parents came forward and they put a couple of tranches. My parents put in $300,000 for me trying to avoid redundancies. And people would say to me, well, why did you go on with it so long? Because CASA led me to believe I could resolve it. CASA kept thinking it was just around the corner. This went for 8 months, Clinton. 8 months.
Well, about 6 months in, you get this email from Peter White, 13th of March 2019. It should be up on the screen. I'll look sideways to read it, but it's unusual in a lot of respects. First of all, Peter White says, Dr. Alec has asked, and I agree with the intent, that I communicate the following messaging so that the APTA legal representative is clear on Lara's expectations prior to the meeting. I think it's legal and regulatory affairs. So what this email from Peter White seems to do is to cut and paste some stuff from Lara that they've obviously drafted into his email, and it seems that Peter White is taking responsibility for agreeing with what with the intent, and it's hard to know whether he's agreeing with the intent of telling you all this, or he agrees with the intent of what it all is. You see, I understand it's a very good thing that CASA explains in words of one syllable, but we'll see it's words of many syllables, what its requirements are today. And that's a different thing from who took responsibility for deciding what those requirements were. But in any event, we've got this lobs into your lap. This is 13th of March, so November, December, January, February, March. So you've been 5 months into these restrictions. The purpose of this correspondence is to put beyond doubt the Civil Aviation Safety Authority's understanding of the current status and prospective disposition of matters relating to blah, blah, blah. So this is 5 months in. You'd think it would have been more reasonable and appropriate for them to have put that to you in October, because the 23rd of October 2018 letter didn't give much wriggle room for anything. But it goes on to say, and this paragraph intrigues me. The operational and organisational arrangements contemplated by CASAR Part 141 and Part 142 are based on a conventional business model under which all of the operational activities conducted by an authorised holder are carried out for and on behalf of the authorisation holder by persons employed by, in all respects, acting as agents for the authorisation holder. Now, I just look at that, and my opinion is it's just wrong on the face of the legislation. We saw the definition of personnel, and also, and as we'll see, CASA conceded. We'll get to the email where CASA wrote to you and said, actually, we've got external legal advice that says what you're doing isn't precluded. So another change of position, but I'm just reminded of, I watched the outgoing Chief Justice of the Federal Court, Chief Justice Allsop, retired. I don't know whether it was in something I read in one of his speeches or a judgment or hearing during a case. But he said that the word agent is the single most misused word in the law, and duty of care is a single most, because there are lots and lots of people who do things for people who are not, in all respects, acting as agents of the authorisation holder, in all respects. An agent in law, a real agent in law, in all respects, is someone who has actual authority to create legal relationships between a principal and a third party. That's what an agent in law is. I have actual authority to create a legal relationship between Glen Buckley and Fred Nurk, where you're obliged because I'm your agent. Now, if this were true, it would mean that when Qantas was employing its own baggage handlers as employees, they could have gone off to the Fair Work Commission and said, we are in all respects agents for Qantas, and we now put in a submission that's binding on Qantas, doubling our salary and doubling our leave entitlements. Now, simply giving that example shows what a ridiculous suggestion it is, that all people doing things, all the personnel of a certificate holder are in all respects agents of that holder. And as I said, those operations that we know on that go on where an organisation brings on an independent contractor as an instructor or something, I'll bet my bottom dollar that the arrangements between them and the certificate holder will have a clause in it that says the person acknowledges that they are not and will not hold themselves out in any respect as employee or agent for the certificate holder. That's the whole point of the arrangement. So the certificate holder isn't obliged to pay superannuation and sick leave and all that sort of stuff. So I just looked at that and I shook my head. As I say, we'll see that a couple of months later, it seems to that they seem to have changed tack. And then notice one here. So this is CASA's firm settled position on what the rules require. APTA must provide CASA with a final and complete version of the contracts into which APTA has entered or proposed into with the legal entities APTA has agreed. So it's your job to put those contracts to APTA, to CASA, so that CASA can decide whether the contracts that you propose to use satisfy them. And that's what I call the you need to think, you need to guess what words we want to read in order to satisfy us. And again, as we'll see, we'll fast forward shortly. Eventually, CASA thought, hang on a sec, maybe what we should do is come up with the clauses that we want to see and say to APTA, these are the clauses that we would like you to use. And if you put them in these contracts, those will satisfy us. And again, you'd think, why didn't you do that from day one?
Oh, absolutely. Oh. And, it's important in order to know if you say something's wrong, you need to know what right looks like. Yeah. So if they come into me and they say to me, this is wrong, this isn't, no problem if you think if it's wrong, but I need to know what right looks like in order for me to fix it. And this was the issue, Clinton. And this is what I think we're getting into the crux of the problem now. The truth of the matter is, there never needed to be any issue. I've been doing this for a decade. CASA really had helped me design it. CASA had approved it. That's the truth. I'd been doing it for a decade. Something went wrong in CASA. Somebody found out about it, decided that it was illegal, made a mistake because it wasn't illegal. And that was supported by the Ombudsman's investigation. And then there was just this complicated web that I call an alternating narrative. We went down the whole contracts issue. Clinton, this entire matter could have been absolutely, and this I want Miss Spence to understand, because this is what I'm going to tackle CASA on. This entire matter could have been completely wrapped up within 4 hours. And I say that because, remember, even though CASA didn't know about it, they had worked with me for 3 years designing this exact thing. Even though CASA apparently didn't, they had done it and they had to put. So all the systems and procedures and all the legislation, everything's attended to, everything.
Yeah.
So it was just to put some words in the contract to describe what it wasn't really to outline areas of responsibility, because it's already done over in the exposition. It could have been, people didn't want to resolve it. The trading restrictions were in place. For some reason, for 8 months, I couldn't resolve the contract issue. After I handed the business over to the new owner, bloke without a pilot's license, he could organise the contracts issue in like 48 hours.
Yeah. So we go to 30th of April 2019. So yes. November, December, January, February, March, April. So we've got 6 months of you bleeding money and the reputational impacts of what had happened.
Yeah. The rumour mongering, the gossip in the industry, hanging my head down low. My parents are now funding it. We're getting at the time now where I've run out of money. My parents, I think, have put their first tranche of money in, $150,000 or something by then, to look after the staff.
Yeah.
It's pretty stressful by now, It's pretty stressful, Clinton.
Oh, look, as I said, this discussion can't do justice to the level of stress that you must have been under, financial, physical, mental, trying to sort all this out. But this
And
is
everybody around me, Clinton, is saying, Glenn, why can't you resolve this? You know, the members who have now been previously approved and are hanging on to theirs for survival for 6 months are begging me for answers. Schools that are trying to join APTA and have just changed their whole direction to come and join APTA, and they've got planes sitting up there, instructors waiting to start, are begging me to get this resolved. And I'm telling them, I don't know why I can't resolve it. It's just tell me the words. There's no resistance from me. There's no resistance. I've already got 100% responsibility, CASA. Make me have 120, 130, right, whatever you want. There will be no resistance from me. I understand I'm fully responsible for this. Tell me the words that are going to make you happy. Bang.
Yeah.
Right in. Now, the technical writing's there. 4 hours, the whole thing resolved. It's bizarre.
Well, 30th of April, Peter White writes to you and says, CASA has now received the external counsel advice, and he has confirmed inter alia that a Part 141 certificate holder is not precluded from entering into contractual arrangements with other parties to deliver flight training activities. Well, it seems to me, with respect to the council, I agree, but it's obvious when you read the legislation and the definition of personnel, and when you read that definition, it says contracts or other arrangements, and given the structure of the definition, it covers in people who are not employees of the certificate holder. Then it goes on to say, CASA has issued instructions to external legal providers for the provision of model clauses that would meet the minimum regulatory requirements to enable one above. CASA expects this work to be provided to CASA by 15th of May 2019. Now, again, if we accept at this point of time that the demands that they were putting upon you about this contract issue were required by the regulatory regime, then maybe they should have done this months before. Maybe they should have done this before they wrote to you saying it's all unauthorised and illegal and you got 7 days to live.
Well, Clinton, they should have done it 10 years ago. They shouldn't have led me on for 10 years. But not just me, like across the industry, you know, everybody, I mean, you know, this is quite common practice. I mean, this should have been happened. I was 25 years in the industry. This was the standard CASA approved practice. So, I mean, it's a reversal, but correct. You know, if there was any concerns.
Yeah, every time you applied for a variation to your AOC for it to cover flying training activities at a different location, they should have said, right, well, we need to see the contracts with these clauses in there. You don't have to guess. These are the clauses that we require, so go off and get them.
Absolutely.
So this is 6 months in of all the disruption and bleeding money, and then.
Sorry, and I just want to add in there. Sorry, Clint. I don't want you to lose your train of thought. But
that's right.
By now, you know, an organisational culture that was industry leading. Truly, you know, we had and the people that worked with me right from when I started, all know it's absolutely decimated. Now everybody's been hanging on to their job for 6 months. The company's bleeding. They know my parents are putting in money. People start to get worried about their job. People start looking for jobs. It's just feeding on itself, and the whole thing's just crashing around. All I needed, Clinton, was one thing. I was happy discussing this with CASA for 10 years if they want to go on with it. I just wanted them to lift the interim approval on the business, because remember, the businesses only they kept doing these short-term approvals. That's what really caused the harm. You know, it's like the proportionality of it. Just talk to me. You don't need to put these interim approvals where we can trade until this day for 24 hours here, for another 90 days here, because I just can't enroll students. No one's got any confidence. Suppliers are calling me. BP's starting to get shaky, my fuel supplier now. I mean, it really, it just snowballing, you know, like, wow, it was horrific.
Yeah. And I can imagine, as I said, I can hardly imagine the amount of stress that you were under, because after that 30th of April email that said what you were doing wasn't precluded by legislation, we're going to give you contract clauses. You referred to this earlier on the 20th of June 2019. Then you got correspondence that said, no, the only thing that can be conducted under this AOC, you can go into the detail, or the only people that can deliver instruction are employees. Is that what it said?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, well,
And the lead up to that, Clinton. So I just want to, and just to wind back a little bit, just to show how. So you've got to remember, right at the start of it, Cass has come in and said to me, you're operating unlawfully against these. You're going to be prosecuted. Then we went down the path of, I can maybe become unlawful if we can work out the wording in the contract, and we might actually let you continue operating. It'll all be okay. And this has dragged on for like 6 months. Then they've gone to the lawyer. The lawyer said, actually, Glenn can do what he wants to do. Well, they've gone and got those. Now, they got the model clauses from the lawyer, and they gave them to me, and I embedded them word for word into the contract, and I got back to them with CASA within 48 hours. Then what happened is Peter White sent me an email saying we're all good to go, that they were happy with. This is after, I think, 6 or 7 months now of hemorrhaging, and then 4 hours later he sends me another email saying, hold off, we'll talk. And the whole thing was, now the contracts was off the table. It was just like, it was completely parked aside, the thing we've been fighting over the 6 months. And now it became everybody has to be an employee. And I was like, not everybody has to be. He said to have direct operational control, everybody has to be. And I have these emails. This isn't he said, she said. The emails exist. They had to be employees.
So by that stage, how confident were you that you would get a settled position on the basis of which you could make fundamentally risky business decisions?
If I was truthful with you, Clinton, by now, as anybody would be, this is 8 months of being absolutely hammered at them, throwing everything at me. There was not a skerrick of doubt in my mind that as long as Glen Buckley was leading that business wasn't going to be permitted to continue. And as evidence of that statement, when I remember I gave the business away, it was just, I knew I was getting hammered. The business was hemorrhaging. I walked away from it. It's just pay the debt, and it was a proper handover. But I couldn't work out the contracts. With 25 years in the flight training industry experience as a CFI, a head of operations, a CASA-approved CEO, Grade 1 multi-engine IFR instructor, run a flying school for over a decade. For some reason, I couldn't work out the word in the contracts. But when the new people take over APTA, within 48 hours, a bloke who's got no experience in the flight training industry seems to come up with the wording that's okay, and then all of a sudden the Latrobe Valley is permitted to continue. And I am going to seek under freedom of information, I intend to request the acceptable contract between Latrobe Valley and APTA that was acceptable to CASA, because that's the contract that someone with no flight training experience was able to resolve the whole issue in 48 hours. So I'd love to see what that contract looks like.
Yes. Well, I mean, from my perspective, I think if you've committed a crime, it's that you are very naive, despite all your experience, very naive when it comes to promises from CASA about when a new package of rules is going to be introduced, how simple they're going to be, how settled their interpretation of them is going to be. There'll be a single CASA position on what those rules mean. It'll all be very, very clear. But anyway, there's lots of people who've learnt that lesson. I just want to now bring up the sort of the latest development, or the second latest development, which is the letter from Ms. Spence dated 25th of May. And this hopefully that'll pop up. And it's remarkable in a number of respects, and I just want to get down to these two key paragraphs, because as with most written communications from central office in CASA, it is exquisite. It's exquisite in the way it's been crafted, in my opinion, to play down the impact that CASA's actions had on APTA and therefore you and your family, and also a little bit of what I call revisionist history. But we'll go through this sentence by sentence, because I always enjoy dissecting these exquisite pieces of language. It starts by saying, these paragraphs say, that said, what is apparent is that CASA is yet to acknowledge the Industry Complaint Commissioner's findings of 18 July 2019. Now let's pause to think how utterly ridiculous it is to say, CASA hasn't acknowledged that our own employee, the ICC, made these findings. It's like, well, if CASA doesn't acknowledge that the sun came up this morning, then it didn't come up. We don't need CASA to acknowledge anything. As a matter of fact, that those findings are there. It's a CASA employee's findings, and if that's the way they're going to treat things, like, well, the ICC can find that we don't agree with it. Yes, all these people out in the regions have interpreted the rules this way, but you can't rely on that because we don't acknowledge that's correct. Then people dealing with CASA should be dealing with one person and one person alone and saying, okay, Ms. Spence, what do you acknowledge this rule requires? Because it seems like unless you acknowledge it, CASA doesn't acknowledge it. It's ridiculous. The ICC found that the timing of the change in CASA's regulatory approach in October 2018 and the manner in which it was communicated to APTA were likely to be unfair, even though the regulatory approach itself was appropriate and reasonable. And I always like that self-serving characterisation. Everything that CASA does is appropriate and reasonable. Just ask them. And they'll give themselves a pat on the back. And we'll talk about that regulatory approach itself was appropriate and reasonable. What was the regulatory approach in the 23 October 2018 letter? The regulatory approach was that this was all unauthorised and everything was happening in breach of the law.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
It didn't say
it was bullying. It was bullying and intimidating. That's what it was: bullying and intimidating.
It didn't say the regulatory approach then wasn't. We've figured that there's a couple of little ticks in the box that you weren't asked to tick. We need you. We've got external legal advice that says what you're doing isn't precluded, but we need you to put these clauses into your contracts and into these contractual arrangements. And once you get those two ticks, tickety-boo. That's in 2018. There was it was just saying, it's all unauthorised, and your APTA was aiding and abetting criminal offences. Apparently, the ICC also concluded that CASA had taken a different position about APTA's business model without forewarning, and collectively, it was likely to have had sufficient information about APTA's business and operational model prior to October 2018 to form a position about its compliance with regulation. Well, let me say, it's not likely, it's certain that CASA knew what was going on, because that was its job. It was being paid to assess the circumstances against regulatory requirements. And if there was some relevance to whether someone was an employee or not, and some relevance about contractual clauses, then that they were on notice of that, and they should have inquired into it. And the fact that they didn't means that they made a decision that it wasn't relevant. Or if it was relevant and they failed to dig into those details, then they stuffed up. There's no other alternative. If you accept the reasonable and appropriate regulatory position, then the reasonable and appropriate position that should have been put to APTA years earlier. And each time you applied for a variation in your AOC to expand your operations, they should have said, no, you're not allowed an expansion because you haven't told us all this information. So I don't think it was well, you might have a different view. Was there any chance that the people working with APTA didn't know about what was going on?
It was the very purpose. We had extensive discussions with the CASA personnel. These things, and these CASA people will come forward and tell the truth when the time comes. I mean,
maybe what CASA will do is say, we don't acknowledge that ever happened, and until we acknowledge it happened, it's just a non-fact. Who knows? Yeah. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the IC's findings on these issues and to set out CASA accepts those conclusions. Well, what are they going to do if they reject the conclusions? But then again, they've got to provide reasons, their logic for rejecting those conclusions. And I should say, as an aside, given some various FOI requests I've put in and analysed, I'm very impressed with the CASA ICC, because the CASA ICC seems to have some nous and a moral compass, which leads him very quickly to spot the problems in lots of things. And the gap is when they make those findings, people drag their feet, acknowledging them and doing anything about the terrible consequences of what the ICC has dug up. So I would like to extend, reflecting on those findings on behalf of CASA, I would like to extend our apologies for the timing and manner of CASA's correspondence on 23 October 2018, that after significant change applications may not be approved. I accept that it was likely that you had relied on information from CASA. Likely? Is it likely?
That you're 100%, yeah.
What? It's likely.
It's offensive to me. But
it's certain. What else are you going to do? You come to them and you say, I want you to assess my application for activities under this AOC over there. What else can you do but rely certainly on what they tell you about what they need in order to satisfy them with the regulatory requirements? So I accept that it was likely. No, it was certain that you'll forgive me if I'm wrong. Was it certain that you relied on the information?
It was certain.
I mean, in certifying them, they're saying that those arrangements complied with regulatory requirements. On temporary now it says temporary basis there. That's an interesting. I don't know what do you understand the significance in temporary basis? Because weren't there activities at locations that weren't temporary, had been going on for quite some time?
Yeah, just to give you a brief overview on that there. So basically, and we sat down across the desk. I remember, I won't say their names, but they recollect this conversation because I have spoken to them. But I sat across from the CMT team, and we spoke about how long. The question was, and my other head of operations was there, my safety manager. We were all the executive management team, and they had a discussion about how long it would take CASA to approve a new base. CASA's response was it would take 6 to 7 weeks, I think was there. Something in that vicinity, 6 or 7 weeks. Then it was CASA that said, why don't you use a temporary locations base? And to be honest, I hadn't thought of that. And I remember sitting back in the chair in the boardroom there, and then it was Nishi, the flight CASA FOI, said, well, these are already approved bases. Like Latrobe Valley is already operating. Ballarat Air Club is already, this was his conversation, is already operating under somebody else's AOC. He said they already obviously meet CASA's requirements as far as facilities and the size of the building, et cetera, et cetera. So he said what you could do is to facilitate continuing operations, use your temporary locations procedure, activate them, but we had the approval to do as a 142 organisation, activate them in the interim, okay, once we're satisfied. And we had a very extensive process that we designed with CASA and CASA approved before we took these bases on to induct them. They would then come on. We would run their existing systems and our new systems in parallel so that there was good overlap. And then we would submit the application to CASA. And it was CASA's recommendation that we operate using our CASA approved temporary locations procedure while they process the application. And in fact, Learn to Fly, it took them 12, I think it was 11 months, just under 12 months to process Learn to Fly's application. So we put the application into Learn to Fly, activated as a temporary base as it was supposed to for the 6 or 7 weeks. Okay. It was really just a temporary base in name because it just operated like all the other schools, everybody fully inducted, but for the terminology, so we knew where we were with the process, it operated. Learn to Fly went for almost 12 months. We kept saying to CASA, when's this approval going to come through? And then CASA sent the approval through for Learn to Fly. So my point would be, if you sat on that application for Learn to Fly for 12 months, it was supposed to be a 5-hour regulatory task. That's what we paid for, 5-hour regulatory task, 12 months. So it was very comprehensive, the CASA processes. So.
And then the letter goes on to say, it is apparent that with the benefit of hindsight, once CASA had identified the issues with the proposed model. Now, let's just talk about the benefit of hindsight and once CASA identified the issues with the proposed model. That language suggests that they woke up at some time in 2018 and had an epiphany and realised, oh, this is all unauthorised. All of what we've been facilitating in discussions with you and encouraging you to believe was certified. They woke up one day and found out all these facts, like the nature of the relationship between you and all of the personnel and aircraft at these locations. Like they only found out about that in looks like sometime in 2018. Now, as we've discussed, all of those issues, if they were regulatory issues that were relevant, they should have been identified years before when they were working with you. But setting that aside, let's say they really found out something, CASA, I'm talking about CASA, found out something new and fundamental about the legal compliance with your with APTA's structure. You don't need the benefit of hindsight to say, gee, is this going to be a problem if we lob this hand grenade into the middle of this family saying, guess what? You don't need hindsight to know that the way in which to deal with that epiphany is not to write you a letter saying, congratulations, it's all unauthorised, you're facilitating unauthorised thing in contravention of the law. You don't need hindsight to do that.
No.
Anyone with an ounce of humanity and general moral compass would know that. But reflecting on that, now that you've told me about the guy that signed the letter and his introduction, I suspect that he didn't comprehend the massive consequences, and he was just used as the convenient. Hey, mate, sign this. Send it out, and because I can't understand how anyone with a moral compass and an ounce of humanity would not understand that letter was like lobbing a hand grenade into the middle of a family picnic. And she goes on, and CASA's change of position on this issue would have been unexpected and unsettling. And that's just a gross understatement based upon
Clinton, it's more than that. Sorry, this, I'm not angry at you. Now, this gets me angry, really. It's much, much more than unexpected and settling. There's businesses was closed down. I lost my home. I lost my business. I lost my job. I lost my life savings. I lost my mental health. I lost my physical health. I lost my self-respect. Staff lost jobs. Businesses closed down. Suppliers were left unpaid. Students had their training impacted, okay? I carry that burden every day. My father said to me yesterday, he said, well, when you put the business over to the other people, don't they take on those responsibilities? Well, absolutely they do. They chose not to pay them. The burden's mine. I carry this every day, Clinton. Okay. People know about this. I had a nervous breakdown and ended up in a psychiatric hospital over this, Clinton. I mean, my life has been devastated. So, Miss Spence, that's offensive, and that's why my wife's coming with me to meet you.
Yeah, because from my perspective, when I get a letter from AVDATA with charges for aerodromes that I haven't been to in accordance with the AVDATA letter, that's unexpected and unsettling, because I've got to spend 15 minutes writing back to them saying, no, that's not right, this is wrong, and I've got to divert my day to 15 minutes of non-productive activity for over $6.20. That's, or somebody backs their car into a bollard in a car park. That's unsettling and unexpected for them. But to be told, you get a letter saying, oh, this is all unauthorised and you're committing offences. I'd invite Ms. Spence to contemplate this scenario. She's sitting in her plush office at CASA. just got another 15 grand a week in a pocket. The pocket's full. I think it's around 15 grand a week. I haven't done the precise calculations. It's all monopoly money once you get to that level. And she opens a letter on a desk, and it's from the Deputy Prime Minister saying, guess what? You were unlawfully appointed. You didn't satisfy the requirements for the appointment because you didn't hold a driver's license. Your appointment is invalid. You are now impersonating the public official, which is an offence. Clean up your desk and go home. Now,
and sorry, Clinton, and while you're cleaning out your desk, because remember, I lost my whole life, my superannuation, everything. So while you're cleaning out your desk, we're going to be accessing your superannuation fund and flushing that down the toilet.
So after that unexpected and unsettling letter, I suspect that what would go through Mrs. Spencer's head, the roller coaster ride of emotions and disbelief at the possibility of getting that coal, she'd probably get to the point and say, well, hang on a sec, nobody told me that I had to have a driver's license to have this job. So if it is a requirement, why didn't they tell me? And by the way, everybody knew I didn't have a driver's license. It's on my LinkedIn profile. I'm making this up, my LinkedIn profile and blah, 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 because that's the sort of situation you're in where you get this letter saying it's all unlawful, and you've got the prospect, which became reality, of the damage that was done to you financially, physically, and mentally. It's just an extraordinary, it's an extraordinary thing, and it didn't need the benefit of hindsight to know the consequences of that lobbing into someone's in-tray unannounced.
You know what would have solved the? You know what would have avoided this whole thing if CASA actually followed their own regulatory philosophy. If they actually, I mean, I know it's not legally binding and it has no, but just it's back to the ethics, the principles of it. CASA could have resolved this in 4 hours if they wanted. They chose not to. They chose to bury me. But and it's so I know the regulatory philosophy is not binding, but get rid of the thing. Don't put stuff up there if you're not. I don't care if they have a regulatory philosophy. I truly couldn't care less. It's a waste of time anyway. But don't put it up there because you lead people to believe that that's your organisational culture. That's how you think. That's how you act. And as an organisation and business, I depend on CASA to act in accordance with their philosophy. So if you're not, you go through it, Clinton, on this thing, and I think 9 of the 10 points, it's disgraceful, their performance against it. So get rid of it.
Anyway. So, well, now this is real hindsight. Let's assume that the regulatory approach, which CASA said was appropriate and reasonable, and we're not quite sure, well, they're referring to 2018, so I can't, the 2018 letter, I don't know what's reasonable and appropriate about that approach. So I think maybe what they're referring to is all of this stuff around contract clauses and employees, but it's actually hard to pin down what regulatory approach they're talking about. But that uncertainty of itself is a problem. And if you'd known back when you were thinking about implementing the concept, what was going to happen, if that was the regulatory approach and the way they were going to deal with you, would you have gone ahead with what you did?
No, I wouldn't have, Clinton. If I knew they were going to be so combative, you've got to understand this was a change because they were supportive, they were encouraging, I was working with them. So I guess I felt good. If I knew that it was going to end up like this, I just wouldn't have done it.
Yes. And I suspect
they asked me to take the lead on this. It was CASA that approached me and asked me to take the lead on it. I remember the other schools warning me at the time, saying, "Don't do it, Glenn. Don't do it. You'll regret it." They all warned me.
Well, as I said, if you committed any crime, it's the crime of being very naive, notwithstanding your long experience with these kinds of things. Now, on that note, what do you envisage to be the next steps in this, and what can the many people who support you, what can they do what are the next steps, and what do you want people to do to help?
Well, look, I guess, I haven't sort of prepared an answer for this, but let me talk about this. Okay, so the first thing is I know there's a GoFundMe page going, And that GoFundMe page, emotionally, it gives me especially before I went into hospital recently. I guess I'm a lot better now and handle things a lot better. But that GoFundMe page, as well as people, gives me a lot of emotional support. To be honest with you, I'd like to put a temporary pause on the GoFundMe. And I want ethics to prevail. I want to go and sit down with Miss Spence. I want to sit across the desk from her and I want to talk to Miss Spence. And when I come out of that meeting with her, it will be very, very clear in my mind which way I am going. Very clear. I said to my wife, I said to her tonight, when we walk out of that meeting, we will know if we are litigating or not. Just bear with me. So I will give her that up. So I guess that's where I am. So I'm a letter. Those that follow on P. Prune will know that I've sent a letter to Miss Spence. She's responded. There were some discrepancies in it, which I've addressed so that we can move forward in the meeting and not be wasting time over areas of dispute. I'll have that meeting with Miss Spence, my wife and I. Depending on who she brings to the meeting will determine who I bring to the meeting. Hopefully it can be a smaller group as possible. To be honest with you, ideally I'd like, and this is going to sound quite bizarre, I'd like a member of the Australian Federal Police there, to be honest with you, because either I have committed an offence or somebody has. So there's either misfeasance in public office, misleading information, or otherwise I've been slandering CASA personnel saying that they've been providing false and misleading. So I think this is getting to the stage really where it actually needs a proper investigation with somebody, it could be someone from the Prime Minister's Department allocated. It could be a couple of Australian Federal Police officers. But I think someone really needs to look at this and say, right, who's committing the criminal actions here?
Yeah, well, a lot of those things like misfeasance in public office, that's not a criminal offence. It's not an AFP matter. I don't think, although I mean I'm reminded of the Robodebt Royal Commission and the appalling things that I saw that have been revealed out of that. At least the letter that was sent to you on the 23rd of October 2018 didn't have the AFP logo on it. Which the poor people that were the victims of the Robodebt juggernaut received, my fear is that what it's revealed has revealed a cultural thing within the public sector, which is not a one-off. And if we look at Robodebt, that involved tens of thousands of people who were sent letters unlawfully, despite in legal advice that they had received, and then and they just kept going despite all the complaints, all of the alarm bells being rung. And the only thing that ultimately brought it down was two brave people, two young women, in fact, Ms. Masterton and Ms. Amato, who said, stuff this, we'll go to the federal court and challenge the legality of it. First one, Masterton, the public sector pulled a usual dirty trick. AVMED matters are notorious for the dirty trick, where they manipulate things so that the proceedings have no utility. So with Masterton, what the Commonwealth said, we've magically found out that she doesn't owe any money. So we're going to tear it up, and therefore these proceedings have no utility, Your Honour, because they didn't want the federal court looking at it. And what they said it was based on is because the lawyer representing her put in an affidavit, said, well, she told me, Miss Masterton told me, the lawyer, that she declared all her income and therefore she didn't owe the debt. Now, she'd already said that. And so the Commonwealth was looking around. It was just a sleazy trick and in bad faith. But then Ms. Amato pressed on, and that's when it blew up. The legal proceedings, and up until then, the public sector just continued feeding the juggernaut. The appalling thing about it was also, the most appalling thing for me was how debased the ombudsman function of the Commonwealth has become, the circumstances of their engagement. But anyway, you're the purest optimist.
Yes.
And, it may be that the meeting with Ms. Spence is going to be very productive for you. That's a decision that you make, and no doubt you'll keep everybody informed of progress. I mean, at this point, all I can say is there are a lot of supporters out there, as you know, and we're very keen to try and help you as best we can, and keep fighting the good fight. Glenn, any closing words?
No, just to, I guess, a message to Miss Spencer. I'm looking forward to meeting her. I hope just that the meeting can be well intentioned. I just want to thank everybody in the industry, and I must say, I have people. I'm going to just say his name. John Ryan's a name at the moment that springs to mind. There's a lot of people that call me and I don't call them back, and it's not. I just want to apologise to people. Like I'm not in a brilliant space at the moment. It's amazing. Like anything to do with aviation causes me a lot of anxiety. So I guess it's a bit sort of off the cuff. But just to everybody out there who's a supporter, I really do appreciate all your help. I have phone messages that I don't call back. It's because I have to get myself in the right space. But please know I'm embarrassed, to be honest, being around people in aviation at the moment. It creates me a bit of anxiety and I know people say, oh, people don't blame you again, but my name's attached to it. I need to get everybody back as though they'd never, ever met me. And that's what my ultimate end game is, to get everybody back to before October 2008 as though they'd never met Glen Buckley. So it was probably a bit...
Oh, well, stay as strong as you can and keep fighting the fight. And we'll peel off this broadcast, and we all wish you luck.
Good on you. Thanks very much for helping me get this organised, Clinton, and thanks everybody for your support, and keep following me by P. Pruden. I love all your comments, everybody. Cheers. Thank you.
See you, Glenn.
Okay, cheers, Clinton.